Hi everyone, I am Simple Rajra, the Culture and Ideas editor at the Oxford Political Review, and we are incredibly honored to host this panel shortly after Bangladesh celebrated its 50th anniversary as a nation. On the 26th of March 2021, Bangladesh marked 50 years of independence as a confident nation and a rising economy, and we congratulate the people of Bangladesh for that. Today, we speak to our three panelists, Dr. Gowher Rizvi, Professor Habibiul Haque, and Asif Bin Ali, all of whom will be introduced shortly to discuss achievements, challenges, and the road ahead for Bangladesh. Let me begin by introducing our panelists to you and welcoming them. Dr. Gowher Rizvi is the International Affairs Advisor to the Prime Minister of Bangladesh. He is also an academic and has formerly been the MacArthur Fellow in International Relations at Nuffield College, Oxford University. He has also held various appointments at the University of Oxford, University of Warwick, University of Virginia, and the Harvard Kennedy School, amongst others. Welcome, Dr. Rizvi. We also have Professor Habibiul Haque Khondker, a noted academic who is currently a professor of social sciences at Zayed University, Abu Dhabi, where they received the prestigious Outstanding Faculty Award. Professor Khondker earned their doctorate from the University of Pittsburgh and has been a recipient of the Distinguished Alumni Award. Welcome, Professor. And finally, we have Asif Bin Ali, who is an Erasmus Mundus Fellow at Aarhus University, Denmark and Swansea University, United Kingdom. Asif's received prestigious Erasmus Mundus Scholarship by the European Union and the SARC India Silver Jubilee Scholarships by the Indian government, and also is an experienced journalist, having worked with the Daily Observer, amongst others. It is a pleasure to host the three of you. The format for today's event is that I will ask each of the panelists to offer their opening remarks and express their contentment, hopes, and challenges in store for Bangladesh as it reaches its Golden Jubilee. It will be followed by a themed questions round where the panelists can respond to the questions at hand as well as to each other's responses and ensue the discussion. Without much ado, allow me to invite our speakers and to give their introductory remarks. If I could so ask you to start, Dr. Rizvi.
Thank you, Simple. Let me say that it is truly a tremendous moment for us in Bangladesh, marking the Golden Jubilee of our independence, which also coincided with the birth centenary of the father of the nation. So it was a double celebration for us. And what made this celebration personally to me and to many of my countrymen was that when we started our journey in 1971, I don't believe anybody could have believed where we are today. People often quote Mr. Kissinger's remark. Well, I don't particularly attach much importance to that because he was very unhappy with the creation of Bangladesh. However, one of our staunchest Bangladeshi friend of Bangladesh was Professor Joost Fallen from Denmark. He wrote an outstanding book in which he said, if Bangladesh can succeed, any country, and he said Bangladesh is a test of development. And at that time, the consensus was pessimistic, that no, this will not entirely dependent on foreign assistance. Born in 1971, immediately in the period of global recession, oil hike, commodity prices rising, everything that could go against. It was the most inauspicious moment for the birth of a nation, together with the fact that it was a war-devastated country. 10 million refugees in India, 20 million internally displaced, no real government, a small provincial government, suddenly having to tackle these huge problems. So looking back at the difficulties and the expectations, I think Bangladesh has come a long, long way. I could go into the statistics. My friends might want to go in it. Otherwise, I will come back to them. On the whole, I think it's a good moment to celebrate look back, and then to think about the future. As they say in the financial world, past performance is no guarantee for future success. So we have to think about it, and we have to see where some of the difficulties might be.
Thank you, Dr. Rizvi, for this excellent remarks. If you could turn to Professor Habib.
Thank you, Simple. It's quite an honor to be on this panel with distinguished guests at this forum. I remember I was a young man at the time. I just joined the university as a student, Dhaka University, which was politically very active, but I was politically very inactive. I came from a family where we didn't have, family of civil servants. We were not really keen to join, student politics. So I was an eyewitness to this event, and that was an incredible moment in history to see a nation being born. Very few people, I think, around the world would have that experience of, being part of that history, to witness a nation being born from up close. That was my opportunity. So I watched it very, very closely, very carefully as a non-partisan. I have to admit that. And yet, of course, in such crisis, in moment of war, in moment of a war of independence, you have to take side, and you have to be on this side of the right. So it was a moral choice for me in which way we were going, and I saw that as a movement for self-determination, as a movement for provincial autonomy within the broader framework of Pakistan. That was the movement I was witnessing. But suddenly, dramatically, everything changed when Pakistan Army unleashed, the so-called Operation Searchlight, and that absolutely destroyed any hope for keeping Pakistan together. That the day that operation was launched, a new republic, Bangladesh, was born. And I was an eyewitness. Of course, I left Dhaka a couple of days before 25th March. I was in the students' hostel, SM Hall. And my room was completely burned. When I came back, there was nothing. All my belongings were gone. But I made a choice. It was an exit option. I knew it was coming. I had a sixth sense. I told my friends that it's time to leave. We left SM Hall. And when we came back, we saw the destruction up close and personal. So what was going on in those days? As the nation was born, as Dr. Rizvi pointed out, that later on when I was doing my research was on 1974 famine. Because I was quite inspired by the Satyajit Roy movie, Ashwini Sanket, and that triggered my interest in famine, and later on Raman Subhan told me to look at Amartya Sen's work. But the point is that I looked at it very carefully. You see, this is a big myth that, in Bangladesh politics is so polarized. So there's a myth that goes like this, that when Awami League was ruling Bangladesh, was running the show, it was so bad that Kissinger said, this is an international basket case. The truth of the matter is, the phrase international basket case was used by a very senior American and diplomat, Ambassador Johnson, Ulysses Johnson, at the White House Situation Room before Bangladesh became independent. The war was going on, and in the Situation Room he said that if Bangladesh becomes independent, it will become an international basket case, to which Kissinger, who was there, quipped, but it would not be our basket case. So, as Dr. Rizvi pointed out, that this was the height of Cold War, and that many people don't realize, and the whole world, the whole so-called free world, the Western world, led by the United States of America, officially they were siding with Pakistan. This was almost an impossible task. Sri Raghavan, makes it very clear in his book that it was a Herculean effort for India and for the few friends that Bangladesh had in the socialist bloc. But we had support from Edward Kennedy and other civil society in the US. But the governments of the Western world, they were against us. They didn't want to see us being born. So this was not just a casual remark from a senior diplomat. This was the mood of the time. So at two fronts, our freedom fighters at the battlefront, and our diplomats and our friends and intellectuals in the intellectual and academic front, they had to wage this battle, this Herculean task of mobilizing opinion in favor of our freedom struggle. So I'll just stop here, and when I get a chance, I'll come back to recollect, how much you have traveled from those to the present, where almost everyone, is celebrating, the 50 years of Bangladesh, whether it is Biden, whether it is Putin, Boris Johnson, even Nicholas Kristof, New York Times columnist, who has always written very negative things about Bangladesh, has suddenly come back to say that America should learn from Bangladesh. I was very happy to see that.
Thank you, Professor Habib. That's really interesting of you to point out, and we would definitely love to get back to this discussion. Asif, if I could just turn to you. And
thank you, Simple. Thank you very much for inviting me. And it's an honor for me to join in a panel where, Dr. Rizvi is joining, whose academic work is always a signpost for me to look into my academic career as well as Professor Habib, who happens to be my mentor, and we are also co-editing a book together. So it's really an honor for me to join with him in the same panel. Now, having said that, I want to go back to my personal story. So I was born in 1991. And the poverty rate during that time, people living under the poverty during that time was 43%. When I left country in 2016, the people living under the poverty line was 16%. Now, in my entire lifetime, you can see the change, that how we have done the progress. We have been able to take off people from, where in 1971, we had a time that 10% household was having the 80% of the land. And now in 2020, we are having that distribution in an label that people are having more land, people are having more income, people are having more nutrition. So given that entire situation, Bangladesh in last 50 years has done exceptionally good in the economic front, of course. And we have many standard needs to be met in the front of freedom of speech and, of course, the human rights. But given that situation as well, the thing is that if I were born in 1971, I would be living 42 years only. Okay, my average living time would be 42 years. But now, because of these change and because of the independence and because of all the good work that had happened and done by the previous and current governments together, and all the leaderships that we are having from post 71 to till today, I can live 72 years. So I think that's a very big thing. So I have like 32 years more to live with my age. And I think with our generation, that is the biggest part of achievement, despite having all those stuff that we may talk about. But I think this is a moment to celebrate that, okay, we haven't achieved everything, but we have achieved something that we can count upon, and then we can build on it for our next future. So, and I really look forward to see how my country is doing. And I believe, like, by the time my child would be coming in this country and having the citizenship of this country, they'd be having at least 90 years of per capita, like, years to live and to explore more of the world that has offered to give to this new human child. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Asif. These are really hopeful statements, and we wish the same. Just some reflections on the past. I think it would be interesting for our diverse array of viewers to begin with some reflections on how we've traveled. I understand that the introductory remarks have also, briefly touched. But coming on to particular subjects, if we talk about Bangladesh's birth, the question I have is on the late 1960s phase, leading up to the 1970 elections, where a separatist identity from Pakistan was clearly articulated. Was it simply a linguistic demand, or do we understand that as something that is fused with a socio-economic blueprint? If the authors could elaborate on that, anyone?
Shall I?
Dr. Rizvi,
Yes,
of course, please.
Actually, the whole idea of Pakistan was a very unnatural concept. If you look at 1940 resolution of the Muslim League, which, without mentioning the word Pakistan, demanded the creation of separate homelands from the Muslims in India, it had talked of two independent sovereign states. So when in 1947, the 40 resolution was dropped and attempt was made to create a one integrated, strong federal government state, that was the beginning of the end. Absolutely the beginning of the end. Two wings separated by 1,000 miles of India, with different language, different culture, different outlook. Everything you can imagine was different except for a shared religion. And even that shared religion was practiced so differently that many Pakistanis wouldn't even call us Muslims. So in this sort of thing, it was not only language, it was democracy. Ours was a struggle for democracy. Ours was a struggle to realize that we are a plural society. There were Hindus, Muslims, Christians, Buddhists. So idea that a state could be based on religion would not work. We needed a secular. So that was another rift. And most of all, it was essentially a question of Pakistan's persistent refusal to recognize that with 56% of the population living in East Pakistan, they would reduce our majority into a minority. Control all the machineries, army, air force, navy, civil servants, bureaucrats, and who not, with no share of governance. And once the martial law came in 1958, with the end of elected representatives, and with no Bengali in senior position, whether in the army or in the bureaucracy, or in the business, Bangladesh was totally marginalized. And what I would say is liberation of Bangladesh did not start in the 60s, mid-60s, late 60s, certainly not on 25th of March, 1971. It started the day Pakistan was born, and as Mujibur Rahman, on the eve of his departure from Calcutta, had said, this is not the Pakistan we had wanted. So we will have to start our struggle for the Pakistan that was promised in Lahore Resolution. So you can see it was a very, very, there was, the fact it survived 23 years in itself is a surprising element.
Certainly, Dr. Rizvi. Following up on the same episodes, and we're thinking about the military dictatorship era because Bangladesh has also experienced that, especially under General Zia Rahman. Do you think that Bangladesh's current political institutions bear the mark of that strained relationship, the strain of that dictatorship? How do you think that this historic trajectory currently bears effect on the civil and the military relationship at present?
Is this directed to me or?
You can take it.
You should take it, and then we can hear our responses.
But on the other hand, I don't want to speak too much, because I would love to hear them also. So, actually, historically, some friends of mine, Professor Clapham, then in one of the northern universities in England, had written a book on political dilemma of military rule. And in that study, large number of countries with military rule had been studied. And the clear, overwhelming conclusion was military rulers always left the country in a worse state than they found it. So, unfortunately, this is so true for Pakistan. If there was a little hope that Pakistan might survive, Pakistan's Ayub Khan and subsequently the second military ruler made sure that Pakistan would not survive. Bangladesh started on a very, very hopeful note. Unfortunately, we had a 21 period interregnum of military rulers or military-backed regimes. And this essentially emaciated all political constitutional institutions of the country. It undermined our judiciary. It destroyed our election commission and built into the system things in which we are still trying to get out of it. Even though I would say we are now democratic institutions are now government, not institutions so much. The democratic government is firmly in place, and we have successfully subordinated the military to civilian rule. But the impact of those years of military rule has really left a scar. And in fact, what we are celebrating today, the successes, we could have celebrated it perhaps on our 25th year. Thank you.
Professor Habib,
I want to,
Asif, go ahead.
Sorry, just to start it in a conversation mood, sorry for jumping in. I want to go back with the first point that Dr. Rizvi was making, is about the idea that we started our independence in 1947, the very moment that we got the first independence from the British India. The point is that I want to put it in a more detailed context, because the idea of Pakistan was very much that we wanted to be free from the local jamindars, the landlords. We wanted to be free from the repressions done based on the caste system to us, and we wanted to make us free from social injustice as well as economic injustice that we have been exposed to during the 200 years of colonial rule. The thing is that Pakistan made that promise in 1947 because it was our movement as well. It's not like we haven't fought for our independence. But the problem happens when you see a movement of people has been taken by military. Okay, when you see that the military dictators are now putting people in a suppression and depriving them from the rights that they are aspiring to receive, and giving the wealth to all the ruling and business elite class and maintaining the status quo. So that was the first betrayal of the first independence that became another chain for us. And I think that was the moment that we really thought, okay, like, is this the Pakistan that we wanted? Or our idea of Pakistan and the idea of Pakistan that promoted by the Western wings ruling class? I'm not saying the people, because the people there is still subject of repressions. The real that we wanted, and from that moment actually our movement began. And the interesting thing is that the second question that also Dr. Rizvi answered with the military elite and the military rule, I think that was also to some extent failure even after our independence. That we expected to have a democratic country with democratic institution and parliamentary system. But then we again see, like, from 1975 to 1990, these military rulers are giving some form of participation, but entirely building a kind of a structure that is not pro-people, that is pro-military ruling elite class. And I think there was this frustration among people about that, and which still we have, is that, look, how many people needs to die to receive all the expectations that we are aspiring during our first independence movement to get liberation from British colonial administration, and during our independence movement and Liberation War in 1971. So I just thought like the chain that Dr. Rizvi was trying to mean, and the change that we also expect, is something also needs to be achieved in future. But at the same time, this is an unending movement. So there would be no time in history that we would receive everything, but the movement needs to go on. So of course, we got a country which is geographically independent, but within this structure, there are works to do to achieve those goals that we aspired for, all those actions and dreams that we had for. So, Professor Habib, you may take on there.
Thank you very much. Thank you. No, I just wanted to go back again, the days of 1947. Of course, I was not there. But since then, I've done quite a bit of research, not a great deal. But what is obvious to me now, especially, this is something that I'm learning from a new breed of historians from Pakistan, Yasmin Khan and others, this new breed of historians are saying that it was a mistake. A new generation of Indian historians are saying the same thing. And I fully agree with them. I fully agree with them that now, as I recall and look back, I thought that was a completely, that was a time when people stopped imagining, this was the most reckless thing to do, that you create a country and you allow that kind of, that was genocide number one, what happened in Punjab and what, happened not to that extent in Bengal, but that was a colossal historical mistake, I would say, that they should have spent time, years, decades to sort out the problem. How should we make the transition happen peacefully? Now that I look back, Velvet Revolution, European, East European examples and so on, and I look at Malaysia, in Singapore separation, but there's so many examples of separation. You do not have to go through an ocean of blood to create countries. That was a colossal historical mistake that we should reflect on. Now, Pakistan is a beautiful case of what, Benedict Anderson and Eric Hobsbawm have taught us that nations can be invented. And Pakistan was an invented nation. I was born, in Pakistan, and I grew up loving Pakistan. We are patriotic, and that patriotism was instilled in us from above, from history book. Histories were written to create an opinion. That was like populism institutionalized. You see, and we talk about populism now, but it was then. So the Muslims of East Bengal, they joined, and these are poor people, peasants. They said, no, we want Pakistan. We want a homeland for the Muslims. Now, this idea to create a nation based on religion, I think Pakistan was the first country, as far as I can tell, Pakistan is the first country ever that was created in the name of religion. I cannot think of any other country. The worldwide, we have 200 countries, 200 plus. You will name one more, Israel. And that came later. That was the second country that was created on the basis that we are a religious group and we need a country for us. Now, that cannot be the basis. You look at the different religions around the world. Almost every country is multi-religious, multi-ethnic. So was Pakistan. So in the first speech given by Jinnah at the Constituent Assembly, he gave a beautiful speech. He said Pakistan is a country for Muslims, for the Hindus, for the Christians, and you pray your God. When I read that, I said, Mr. Jinnah, where were you? Why didn't you give this speech a year before? And that would have saved, all these, innocent lives. Can you imagine? That was a colossal mistake. So history was created, nation was invented, and under that constructed nation, constructed history, we kind of accepted Pakistan, that Pakistan, as Jinnah said, has come to stay, and we thought it will stay. And then it didn't, because right from the beginning, as Dr. Rizvi pointed out, that the science of oppression, cultural oppression, Bengalis were looked down upon. My brother served in the Pakistan Air Force, and he has stories to tell that the Bengali officers were cream la cream, and they were looked at as if they don't exist. So the the exclusionary politics of Pakistan, which was based on exploitation and exclusion. So we had no place in that. And Professor Rahman Subhan and Ansar Rahman, all the famous economists have shown the extent of exploitation, that the money earned from our jute export went into building beautiful buildings in Islamabad and Karachi and so on and so forth. So any visitor coming from overseas would go to Pakistan and would see islands of modernity, and they would come to East Pakistan at the time, and East Pakistan was languishing in poverty. And later on, of course, there was a showpiece, the second capital was built. But by and large, we were at the receiving end of exploitation and exclusion, and we were repressed, we were suppressed, we were dominated. So this internal colonialism actually killed Pakistan. I mean, this was an experiment, and that experiment failed because of class oppression, because of cultural subordination, and plus the hegemony of Pakistani sort of rulers they looked down upon. And the military kept playing a big role, from the very beginning. So now people are doubting, the death of Mr. Liaquat Ali Khan, the first Prime Minister of Pakistan. These things are now being questioned. So the military came in officially from 1958. But even before that, they were pulling the strings. So Pakistan was that sort of overdeveloped state, in the words of Hamza Alavi. So military-dominated state, backed up by bureaucracy. So this was a classic, O'Donnell's, bureaucratic authoritarianism. Had Pakistan been a democracy, and this is the, Mr. Zahir's thesis, had Pakistan been a democracy, had Pakistan pursued a federal structure, maybe, Bangladesh would be born much later, gradually and peacefully. I agree with Dr. Rizvi that Pakistan was a geographical oddity. You cannot create a country like that. But it would have taken time, and it would be a peaceful transition that Pakistani rulers, as I meet young Pakistanis now, they fully understand this was not a country, that could survive, that could, go on forever. So at some point it had to break up, but that breakup could be peaceful. I mean, I'm always on the side of peace, and that, to me, that I'm especially bothered by the genocide, by the bloodshed of 1947. I'm extremely bothered by the bloodshed of 1971, and we could have avoided all that. Honestly, we could have avoided that, and that's why I think the leadership of Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman was so crucial. He knew, he was a pragmatic, and he had this deep sense of the future. I was reading, and I don't know whether many people know that when Dr. Kamal Hussein meet Bangabandhu for the first time, that was 1959, way back, a year after martial law of General Ayub. And Bangabandhu and Dr. Kamal asked Bangabandhu that, how long do you think this will continue? And Bangabandhu said, it will take time. It will take 5 years, maybe 10 years. And later on, Dr. Kamal Hussein, writing his very important book, he mentioned that. He was surprised. He thought a political leader would say, well, in 1 year, we'll just overturn the whole thing. No. Bangabandhu knew that it would take time, So that was amazing. So they knew that it will take time, but step by step, first of all, we'll realize the 6 points, we'll get our autonomy, we'll get everything that we want, and the next step, the next logical step from 6 points would be independence. And General Ayub, he knew that. He knew that this is a design for secession. He knew that. And that's why, he passed it on to General Yahya, and Yahya was supported by Bhutto and all the other coterie of right-wing generals. But you see, in Pakistan, we had friends of Bangladesh in Pakistan. So, like Asghar Ali Khan. So they were very sensible, respectable Pakistani leaders who knew that the cause of Bangladesh and the demands made by Bangabandhu and the leaders of Bangladesh, that these demands are absolutely right. That we had genuine grievances, and our demands should be met. So there was a consensus. There was support from the intellectual communities in both wings of Pakistan, both in East Pakistan and West Pakistan. And what we must not forget, that within Bangladesh, unfortunately, and that's the next step, that even when you look at the future, we should not forget that within Bangladesh there were leaders who were opposed to the independence of Bangladesh. And that kind of sentiment of disunity, I think, is going to be a challenge for Bangladesh moving forward.
Thank you, Professor Habib. I think this has been a wonderful lesson in understanding the sort of mistakes that nation states can make in the process of, their genesis, as well as mistakes for future, mistakes that we can avoid in the future, in fact. I want to move on to understanding the challenges of the present. In fact, I want to begin discussing the achievements at first. In terms of Bangladesh's, stellar economic rise, we've seen that since the 1980s, in fact, there has been a stellar rise almost every decade. Its exports have risen by about 80% over the last 10 years in dollar terms. And some weeks ago, the United Nations Development Policy Committee recommended that Bangladesh be graduated from the least developed country status to becoming a developing country. What are the factors for this exponential growth? Is there something specific? I'll circle back to Professor Habib because of their book on globalization, but I want to go to Dr. Rizvi first and see what they think as the response to this question is, in terms of what are the factors.
Thank you. If I were to list the most important factor, and my colleagues may not entirely agree with this, because we are also focused on government industries, that we forget that the real driver and that made our economic development possible was the agricultural revolution in Bangladesh. In 1971, our population was 75 million. We could not feed our population. Virtually every year, it was ship to mouth. If the ships arrived late, starvation or near starvation would come. And since 1971, our population has grown to 160 plus million. Today, we are not only producing enough to feed, we also have some surplus which we can export if we so chose to do. It took the drain away of the foreign exchange, which used to go into buying food, freed it up for investment in other sector. It created healthier workforce until late in the 1980s, touching 1990s. Our food intake was measured in terms of preserving the body weight, which is 1600 calories. Today, if you look at, and it did not talk about nutrition, it just talked about that many calories. Today, people are eating a balanced, nutritious diet, which means we have a better workforce today than we had then. Again, time is short. I could go into lots of things to say about why agriculture has contributed, and without that, this would not have been possible. Second thing, again, I will push government back to the third, is our expatriate workers. Our expatriate workers today remit around 19 billion US dollar with no support from anybody. With no support. It is their sweat, it is their remittance which enables us to balance our books. Our imports far exceed our export. And we would have had an adverse balance of payment every year, but for the remittance of the expatriate workers. Third, I think, which is, of course, everybody will agree, that we, from an agricultural nation, we became a trading nation with the emergence of the garment manufacture. Don't want to in any way take away their glory. They have made major contributions. 4 million employment created, mostly women. That said, they have also been spoon-fed by the government and the state. So they are in a very different category from the agriculturists and the expatriate work. So that is one. The other are, you see, Habib referred to Nicholas's article. When I read that article, my first impression was, God, where is Hamlet? He talks about everything, forgets to mention the government. Policies do matter, governments do matter. For a long time, we have been saying that military rule destroyed first Pakistan and later good parts of the years of. Therefore, democratic governance and policies do matter. It was because governments provided the infrastructure development, transport, road, rail, river. When this current government came to power in 2009, we were generating 4,000 megawatts of electricity, far short of what we needed. I was told again and again when I joined the government, if you can't solve the power problem, your government will not last. Today, we are in excess of 21,000 megawatts. Power, ports, roads, every form of infrastructure which enables the trade to move and business to occur. So that's one thing. Other thing is, there are two things where we went against deliberately against the recommendations and the policies of the World Bank. World Bank's main interest was, if you remember the Washington Consensus, control the money supply, reduce inflation, and everything else will be taken care of. And in any case, market is the better allocator of resources than government. That was which meant that the sort of things which our government did, first, we were the first country no country in the world even today with a comparable level of per capita income, although our per capita income has grown very considerably, to introduce means-tested basic social safety nets, which ensured that nobody would die of starvation, and those who could contribute to the economy were enabled. And that really generated activities in the rural areas and helped to build up speed up our economy. There's a second thing, and I know I'm using a grandiose phrase. The second is, Bangladesh is the first country, again of that modest per capita income, to provide basic, I emphasize the word basic, free basic healthcare, universal healthcare. Now, combination of social safety net together with health and education. When Bangladesh became independent, 24% literacy. Today, we are over 75, three-quarters of the population. Girls outnumber boys in primary and secondary education. Government provides every year, this year alone, despite pandemic, over 330 million textbooks free of cost to all secondary and primary. What all these things are doing is preparing a better workforce, healthier workforce, and providing the social and political stability which is enabling us to continue the journey of progress. So we really need to understand the role of the government in doing this. It did not happen by accident, by fluke, or out of the blue.
Just to take on from there,
See you
simple
smiling. Oh, sorry. I was actually going to ask you. No, so
That's
I was
okay.
just going to say that I see you smiling on Dr. Rizvi's remarks, and I would definitely like to hear what you think about, especially if you could see if there are any shortcomings to the government's economic model. If so,
Oh my God, you put me in the
totally all
difficult.
right. If you just,
Yes,
want to
there
reiterate
are
Dr.
plenty,
Rizvi's stand, of course.
plenty of shortcomings. There are plenty
I,
of shortcomings. I was hoping you would ask me, and I hope you wouldn't let me get away with it. There are a number of shortcomings and problems. That's why I said the past is no guarantee for the future, and we have to. We are celebrating our double graduation from low income to middle income, from LDC to developing. This also creates new challenges. We have had preferred market access in European Union in many countries of the world. As with our graduation, we are going to lose this, and therefore we will have to compete. It doesn't worry me. I welcome it. But it does mean that we have to, we just cannot go on saying we provide the cheap labor. We have to provide productive, our productivity has to be increased enormously in order to remain in the conflict. We have to overhaul our bureaucracy. One of the things that foreign investors are frustrated is the slow level in which how things move in the bureau. We have done a lot. We have created a new institution called Bangladesh Investment Development Authority to reduce all this duality, but still it is there. Our rule of law, one of the things I had said earlier, in prolonged military rule of law was undermined. Rebuilding the rule of law is very, very important. It is happening, but it will need to have much more will have to happen. I can go, and I think my colleagues may want to question me, so I will leave it to them to do it. I would like to go into the question of human rights records of Bangladesh, if you want me to talk about that. I would like to go into talking about freedom of expression in Bangladesh. All those things have. But what our immediate challenge is, in the growth, initially our growth came with fairly inclusive and spread out. In the recent period, inequality is widening, enormously widening. And we are at a point, if we don't do more, it might become irreversible, as it happened in South Korea. In South Korea, after a period of rapid growth, their growth stalled. And the reason it stalled was of inequality. And our tax base is very, very small. GDP to tax ratio is low. Our taxation system panders to the rich. So these important measures will have to be taken. Much more will have to be invested in skills development. Otherwise, this great record, and particularly of Prime Minister Hasina's government's record, in order to be sustained, this celebration not only requires celebration, but also requires retrospection, and we need to be addressing the areas of where some weaknesses lie. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rizvi. Asif, would you like to respond to Dr. Rizvi's comments?
Yeah. So far, I mean, I do agree with most of the point that Dr. Rizvi is making. And if I put it in my way is that, look, we need to be rich. Okay. We have been poor for 100 years and 1,000 years, most probably. The thing is that this idea of golden Bengal that we over the time say in our poetries and in our literature, that's a myth actually. So if you go back and read how those poets were living during those time, you'd see they had hardly able to put enough food in their mouth. So the thing is that we uh, we are in a very we are a very romantic nation. Okay, we have more poet than economists. We have more singer, then we have more software engineers. Now, there are good points for that, and there are some limitations for that as well. So, what happens whenever we look into our history, in our politics, or in our development? We look by using the lens of romanticism, not by using the lens of pragmatism. Okay, so you can have a emotional group of people and destabilize a group, a society, and could break away a country as well. But building country is a very different business. So building something requires certain amount of skill, requires certain amount of positive attitudes towards dissent and differences. Now, so far, as Dr. Rizvi was also mentioning, that Bangladesh has done really good in terms of building an infrastructure, in terms of building a system where a certain amount of growth could be facilitated. Now, having said that, I want to go back with this story that Tagore once wrote, that is Tasher Ghor. That was a very interesting reference point to look at us as well. Are we building a state of cards, or are we building our state based on solid foundation? Now, in terms of economic development, of course, it seems that our economy is running very well, and in all indicators, there is no doubt about that. The caveat in that structure is that we need to do more so that the distribution could happen. So, for instance, what Dr. Rizvi was saying, look, Bangladesh, like UK, following the NHS, wanted to have a healthcare system. And it's amazing because even now, if you go to a public hospital in Bangladesh, you just have to 2 taka to get a ticket and to get treatment. But the thing is that all the money that government is giving to the hospitals, are they going and reaching out to the people who need those care? Or in the line, someone greedy enough are taking that and putting it in the Swiss account? We never know that. So we need a structure such as so that they could stop that kind of mismanagement of resources, and so that the person who is sick need treatment could get better treatment by spending just 2 taka. And that's a very excellent approach, but that needs to be done. On the other hand, let's talk about the food and nutrition level. Of course, like in terms of food and nutrition ratio, Bangladesh is doing better. Like, look, I have like 2 inch more height than my previous generation. That's a huge improvement. Now more Bangladeshis are more taller, their skin are more fairer, not because it's the change, it's because they're getting more food. For centuries, we have deprived from proper nutrition, and that impacted in our physical appearance as well. Now it's changing, but the thing is that the food that we are getting in our plate, are they tasted enough? Are they followed the health measures that needs to be taken care of? So these are the areas that the government needs to work more. On the other hand, and the last, of course, I would say, as I was referring to Tasher Ghor of Tagore's writing, is that, of course, what we see is that before 1971, while Ayub Khan was leading Pakistan, there was this Pakistan model things that Pakistan was doing good in all aspect compared to India. The per capita income was high, the GDP growth was high, infrastructure development was very high. But what we see, like by 2000, there was a huge fall in Pakistan structure. By 2000, Bangladesh crossed Pakistan in terms of GDP growth. And look at India as well right now. Before, till 2000 or 2005, we see India was growing. Indian people were coming out of poverty. But now look at what is happening with the GDP and the other stuff. So there is something very contextual with the South Asian case, which is we are doing, or the previous states did well, but at some point there is a slow growth towards, not so helpful to sustain that. So given that situation, I think Bangladesh right now really needs to think about building its foundational institutions. And I believe Dr. Rizvi would agree with me, as Professor Habib as well. We need to work on our institution. I mean, this is no more the time of emotional poetry or the beautiful praises. This is the time to have institutions which is based on foundations that is solid enough to give a backup to all the complex economic structures that have been developed over the year, and could take a very responsible role to distribute the wealth that we are producing now to the people who really deserve it, but at the same time could check and balance all these people who are in the system, living like parasite and depriving others from getting the resources. So that is my point. Maybe Dr. Habib would join and add something on that as well.
No, I just wanted to underline, and I want to reinstate one point that Dr. Gowher Rizvi pointed out. And this is something that needs to be underlined, highlighted. That is the most important factor, for all the growth that we have experienced is agriculture. And credit should go first to the farmers, to the peasants, for their resilience. You see, I had a friend that I went to school with in America, and he was posted in Bangladesh, serving U.S. mission. And he told me, I asked him that, what is your take on Bangladesh? And he said, in one word, resilience. It's the resilience of the people. So the peasants of Bangladesh, I think they deserve the maximum credit of turning the country around. That Bangladesh is now, thanks to them, hats off to them. The hard work, and it's brothers and sisters of those peasants. Make no mistake, it's the brothers and sisters of those peasants now working in Abu Dhabi, now working in Singapore, in Saudi Arabia, and remitting huge amount of money. And my wife and I work on Bangladeshi domestic workers in Abu Dhabi. And many of our respondents tell us that we want our daughters to go to a school, even to English medium school, because that's where they can embark on a future career that no other schools can give them. So they're fully aware of what needs to be done. So this is the transformation, the entrepreneurship of our peasants, and the entrepreneurship in general. In Pakistan, the perception was that Bengalis are, fish-eating people, they write poetry, they're not good in business. Now, they should come look at some of our entrepreneurs working in Bangladesh, in overseas. Our entrepreneurs are here in Abu Dhabi. Our entrepreneurs are there in Singapore and in Bangladesh. And they have changed the landscape of Bangladesh. Their ideas, their attitudes, I talked to a Singaporean businessman many years ago, and the Singaporean businessman said that your Bangladeshi businessmen are so smart that we envy them, because these are people, who have lived through, this experience. So we have this fantastic entrepreneurial class in Bangladesh, the middle class, business class, and then the peasants. And then these garment workers, they have been extremely innovative in changing their lifestyle, in doing the right things, in overcoming, this patriarchal system. It's not easy for women to come from village to the city and take up a job. Imagine the kind of obstacles. The credit should go to all those places. Coming back to the institution, the other things are not that visible. And one of the invisible things in Bangladesh is the tacit cooperation between NGOs and the government. The successive governments, they backed up the NGOs that we are proud of. BRAC, for example, world's largest NGO. Grameen, which is not really an NGO anymore, but started as an NGO, was backed by government. No one can deny that. Even the smaller NGOs get the support. Of course, sometimes They face obstacles from the governments, from the specific ministries, but by and large, there are a lot of examples of cooperation between civil society, in organizations, NGOs, and government. And this is a very positive thing. Now, moving forward, the challenges for Bangladesh, one is the environmental crisis, which is looming, the global warming, if it is not tackled, and we can play a role, but the international, the global community has to come forward. Otherwise, there won't be Bangladesh 100 years from now. That's the sad reality of ecology. The second challenge is religion. Religion has come into politics, and apparently there are solutions, that we need to pursue. And one of the solutions is this idea of twin tolerance. Twin toleration is an idea advanced by Alfred Stepan. We should look at that very closely, that a democracy will survive if we build that toleration for people who are somewhat against democracy. And how do you do that? You have to be extremely innovative, and it's possible, it's possible to do that. So this is a challenge. Quality of education is a challenge. And I had this rare opportunity of meeting the Prime Minister, and I complained to her. I said, look, we have all these universities, all these institutions. What about quality? And she said, wait a minute. Before you go for quality, first we need quantity. And she's fully aware. She said, I understand that. But let us have the numbers first. Let's build these universities. Then we'll push for the quality. And I can tell you the 200 plus universities now that we have, most of these universities have at least some departments that teach computer science, ICT, and that's the future of Bangladesh. Garments is the present. Future is our entry to the digital world. And I give a lot of credit to the present government because they have made it possible. They have created the infrastructure for the digital revolution that has started to move on. And that's an area where Bangladesh should thrive in the future. So we have challenges. There are issues of human rights and issues of freedom and tolerance. I mean, of course, these are highly, highly important issues that we dream of a Bangladesh where we don't have to, defend, whatever is going on, that we should be more open. We should look at the facts and look, there are serious problems. And from my point of view, these problems are consequences of a democracy deficit at the highest end, and also complicity of civil servants, complicity of police administration, where the government cannot do anything. The jailer of a particular jail, he or she has certain responsibility. In recent months, we have seen that they have completely failed, and there has not been any repercussion, and that's extremely sad. So as we celebrate, as Dr. Rizvi pointed out, that we celebrate, but we also should be introspective. We should look at where did we go wrong, how can we, right the wrong, and how can we create a society. To me, a perfect society is when my sisters and daughters can go home from their workplace by bus at night and no harm will be done to them. That would be my stand. I'm not looking at GDP. I'm not looking at the league table where Bangladesh is. I'm looking at whether our girls can go home from workplace to home safely without being harassed, without being raped, without being treated violently. That would be my standard. We should all aspire to build that. We have the capacity. We have to take a vow. We said, look, now on, we're going to do this, and we can do that. We can do that.
Thank you, Professor Habib, and especially for bringing in the question of human rights. Bangladesh now ranks 151 amongst 180 countries with the lowest score for press freedom amongst all South Asian countries, according to the Reporters Without Borders. In the 2 years since the Digital Security Act was passed, Bangladesh has dropped 5 places. And I want to, ask Asif, since you've worked as a journalist for quite some time, what do you think of these recent developments? And do you see that this particularly is an inclination towards censorship?
The thing is that censorship is not new in Bangladesh. Okay, Bangladesh only received like the summer days of press freedom from 1972 to 73. But after that, we started to see that there are setbacks coming from the ruling class. Now, even the recent problem is not only the problem that is happening now, it has a background. So it's not like all of a sudden we are inventing that, look, our freedom is gone, and and there is this law. The thing is that, and one of my colleagues is doing an interesting research, which is like, do we prefer freedom of speech for the opinion that goes against us? The thing is that while he was doing those survey, he find out that all the people understand who participated, freedom of speech applies only for their opinion, not for the other's opinion. So no matter who is standing in the power, whenever it goes out of that power, it plays the same role. So it has become this the character of the state. It's not only the particular with any particular government, it has become the character of the state. Now the thing is that, of course, there might be many implications of that from the political economy perspective. But I think the specific Digital Security Act, we need an act that could ensure safety in the online space. But do we need an act that would ensure that the people would be misusing it for their particular interest and to serve some group interest? Now, what happened is law would always say so many good things, and then it would be having some lines that could be misused. Now there comes the responsibility of the government, because it's been a couple of years that the Digital Security Act and the previous laws regarding press freedom is working there. Now we have enough data to look at it, that how this could be changed. So government right now has enough empirical data to make a decision that how the improvement can be made, and how, like, Digital Security Act or law such as these, which is not necessarily facilitating the freedom of speech and not necessarily upholding the promises that our founding fathers and the father of the nation made to this country. So considering the existing data and considering the promises that has been there in the political sphere, this law needs to be taken care of course. Now, apart from that, freedom of speech and media is not only hindered by the law, but also by the cooperation of particular ruling elites and particular business class, because they have their own interest and they are existing there without they exist in every times. They were there in the BNP government time, they are here now in Awami League government time, and they would be there in future as well. So now a state needs to think that how a policy could be ensured that would minimize the influence of all those nexus that always work behind the door to ensure their interest, and also could ensure and facilitate free speech in a more possible way. And I think this is an area that we need to work consistently. It's not like it would happen one day, because even if Digital Security Act goes away, there are like hundred of laws that we are inheriting from the British colonialist system, and of course from the military dictator time, is enough to cut down the freedom. So it's not only particular one law, it needs to have a holistic approach to this project. And of course that needs to be based on field data and empirical evidence.
Thank you, Asif. Dr. Rizvi, if I could just speak to you about this, because I'm thinking the award-winning photographer Shahidul Alam has consistently claimed that he was at his desk when he was blindfolded and arrested in his home country. And in numerous interviews, he's pointed, in fact, he's warned that Bangladesh is slipping into an autocracy. Do you see any persistent danger to Bangladesh's democracy?
This is a very fair question and needs a fuller appreciation. Let me just go back a moment. And I apologize, I had got off the line. My line had cut off for a while, so I might have missed a little bit of the discussion. I will refer to the House of Cards, Tashir Ghor. I think Bangladesh, any suggestion to that would be less than fair. Because why the military rule in Pakistan collapsed? Because it did not provide instruments of social stability, like social safety net, access to medicine, okay, and emphasis on distribution. Bangladesh today, even though I have myself criticized the expanding inequality, today in Bangladesh in the last decade, resources have been transferred from urban areas to the rural areas. Nowhere else in you will see this phenomenon. Government deliberately moves resources from urban to rural to make sure that nobody is left behind too much and there is a social stability. I agree with Habib to the extent that quality of education needs to be looked at, as quality of health needs to be looked at. For all governments, there is a challenge, twofold challenge. Access, we provide universal access to education. Access is an obligation of the government, but access ought to come with quality. Quality will take time and resources. So to say that we haven't got, we are not doing enough is not at all really true. Our universities are doing exceptional, especially the state universities. Public universities are doing quite moderately well, and there is more room for improvement. But these will take time. I entirely agree with the criticisms of Digital Security Act. And I think Asif is absolutely right on two accounts. One, every society needs law to prevent the lives and properties and safety of other citizens. When an instrument is being used to hurt, and it has been done again and again in Bangladesh, using digital thing to hurt others, government fails in its responsibility. That the Digital Act has a lot of deficiencies, again, I agree with Asif, is true. But it is less so with the act itself, more so with the way it is being implemented. So currently we are in discussion how to ensure that it is, and again to go to Asif, how to prevent its abuse. Why should a person be immediately arrested just because somebody has brought a case on DSA? We want the magistrates to look for some evidence before approving the arrest. Telling the police you cannot arrest them without taking them to the magistrates first. So these sort of things we are trying to do. And in the end, it's a balancing game. It will take time. And you were, I've been talking that I almost forgot your question. Could you remind me your question again, please?
Simple.
Simple?
Simple, you were silent.
Sorry. Yes, thank you. Dr. Rizvi, I just wanted to ask if you see any persistent danger to Bangladesh as a democracy.
Yes. Thank you very much. In any society where the rule of law weakens, democracy cannot survive or cannot be strong. And that is why I said we have to put a heavy emphasis on restoring a rule of law. Rule of law takes care of corruption, takes care of abuse of law, and treats every citizen equally. Now, both my colleagues have talked about freedom of expression, and the word censorship was also used. Asif will know that there are 350 newspapers in Bangladesh, plus. Surely, it cannot be a censored society. If you come and read the newspapers, you will see that expression of opinion is not being penalized. Yes, some people are telling me, oh, we exercise self-restraint. That may be so, but I think unless you push the envelope open, these sort of time for us is to push the envelope and test it how far we can go. We used to have one television company, one television station, or whatever it is, corporation in Bangladesh. We have 36 plus private television. Surely, not all are owned by the government or government people. There is a fair amount of opinion. If you hear the talking heads, and Bangladesh has an addiction in the evenings to listen to talk shows, you will see over there the problem is not whether they are restrained, but the problem there is people make all sorts of claims without verified information. Opinions are converted into facts. So we need to look at both the sides, but I totally agree that freedom of expression is a fundamental pillar of our civilization. Without that, civilization collapses. That freedom has to be balanced with the safety of the citizens and many other factors, but nothing. In fact, my thing that I've often said to my colleagues, a irresponsible press is better than a controlled press. So even if press sometimes is irresponsible, we should take it on. There's a lot to be done for the democracy. It's not a finished product. It is a project. For the first time in our history, we have had a continuity of government, continuity and stability, which is something rare. I'm not saying the elections were all hunky-dory and perfect. There are problems there, but the public, by and large, has accepted the electoral outcome, and we are trying and do better. We owe it to ourselves to have better and fairer and cleaner elections. But the fact that public has accepted it, the country is stable and prospering, is very, very important. We all agree that without inclusive growth, growth has no value. So we need to put more emphasis on growth. We need to put more emphasis on quality of the lives of the citizens, because the ultimate test of good governance is the quality of the life that the citizens enjoy. And this is why we have made our test citizen-centric. If they are happy, if they are satisfied, if their lives are better, and it's a struggle, it's a strive, we are going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Rizvi. Yes,
yeah, I just want to respond to one point to Dr. Rizvi, which is very important. He mentioned the number of newspapers and television houses. And the thing is that, when you talk about the censorship in Bangladesh, it's not always the government. There are a couple of authorities that are deliberately force press to talk in a certain way that they want to listen. One is, of course, the political authority. The other one is religious authority. And the other one is, of course, the business interest of those media houses. So the problem is that whenever we talk in Bangladesh with the press freedom, because, government is the existing enemy. You can see the government. So you can blame him, okay? But then you ignore all those other stakeholders like religious authority, like business interest. And then what happened is that the discussion regarding press freedom becomes instrumental of the political motivation. Now, that is the place that we need to be careful about as well. And one example I just want to add is that right now Bangladesh is having more than 40 television channels. And then Bangladesh got its first television channel in 2001 or 2000. I guess that was the period while Awami League was in power. And if we look at the data, we would see that it was the Awami League government always given the most number of license to these people. But the problem is that if you look at the ownership model of those television industries and media houses, you'd see certain group of people are coming from BNP political background, Bangladesh Nationalist Party. Certain are coming from Awami League political background, and they have their own interest in that. Okay, so just simply saying that press freedom is in danger in Bangladesh and finding out a singular enemy, I think we would not be doing justice to the fact, because we need to look at the fact from multiple angles. Government is responsible for, allowing a law such as Digital Security Act and not handling properly the misuse of that law. At the same time, journalists are responsible for, affiliating them with certain political party interest and presenting that line in a way so that could serve their personal as well as their institutional interest. At the same time, religious authority, they don't want to listen anything that goes against them. Now, this is a very complex situation where having a black and white like enemy versus, like Voldemort versus Harry Potter discussion would not work here. We need to have a more fact-based and open gray discussion, and we need to come up with a policy solution. Otherwise, government would change. No government stays for 100 years. State changes in last 50 years. So in last 70 years, like my grandfather was first the citizen of the British colonial India. He became the citizen of the independent Pakistan, and then he became the citizen of Bangladesh. Now we see, so given that context, when we are talking about issues such as press freedom and the foundation of the state, we really need to be pragmatic, logical, and of course, inclusive in our approach. Instead of just finding who to blame and deposing it would solve the problem. That doesn't solve the problem actually. So that's my point to add to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Asif. Dr. Rizvi, would you like to respond?
No, I was just going to say to Asif, I totally agree with him on that point. A friend of mine who's the editor of a leading newspaper in Bangladesh told me freedom of press, we have now more or less on a fairly solid base. It is getting the freedom from the owners of the press. And most of the newspapers and television companies are owned by the corporate sector. And they're obliged to pander. And that is what the editors are more concerned. Of course, government's restrictions are also there.
Thank you. Dr. Rizvi, I'm going to just quickly, the question of press freedom and media censorship reminds me of a nation right across the border from Bangladesh. So I'm going to quickly jump ship and reach out to a different, a slightly related but different topic on India-Bangladesh relationship. We've seen that India and Bangladesh, of course, have a historic relationship, which is cemented by the India-Bangladesh Friendship Treaty between Prime Minister Indira Gandhi and Prime Minister Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. The two nations have been consistently each other's priorities. And Prime Minister Modi was, in fact, the chief guest for Bangladesh's 50 years independence discussions. However, there's also a massive protest against Prime Minister Modi in Dhaka one day before his visit over the and there have been protests over the issue of NRC, especially because of the Home Minister's disparaging remarks. Professor Habib, how do we reconcile these two narratives? And do you see that there is a certain disjunction of interests? There's a certain disjunction between Bangladesh's official line as a state and the people's voice. Are there certain differences?
Frankly, I mean, this is not really my area, but I would venture my comment. One is, a nation does not have to speak with one voice. A nation must think, in a singular way, but it doesn't have to speak in one voice. And that, of course, reflects some multiple thinking. So the government doing its job, inviting Prime Minister Modi as the Prime Minister of a leading country in the world, so we have to look at the global context, is the right thing as far as I'm concerned. People protesting for whatever reasons they have their grievances. They're doing the right thing. So we really need to accept, that kind of contradiction as part of democracy, that people do protest, So in my remark, I would just like to highlight two R's. One R is responsible, which is Bangladesh is showing some, slackness on that, responsible, that we need to be more responsible. The police should be more responsible. The minister should be more responsible in their utterances. And people on the street should also exercise more respect, and more respect is the other word, more responsible. That you get annoyed and you just have to, burn down some of your neighbors' houses because they have a different religion is unacceptable in the 21st century world. I mean, we really have to come out of that. So two words are very critical. One is responsible, the other is respect. And we need to live with this, that of course, democracy is multivocal. Democracy is, people would have different opinions. We should respect that, but we should also be responsible. And that actually cuts across the questions of press freedom, the questions of what we put out on social media. I mean, that's a den of irresponsibility. People say whatever they want to say. There's no such thing as fact check, And that's quite amusing, because this is the classic problem that they're facing in America now, and this is a problem being multiplied, in the global landscape, global media escape. That's the same thing. But these are issues that I think have been well covered by Dr. Rizvi and Mr. Asif. I think they have done a good job. So I would restrain myself from that.
Thank you, Professor Habib, for beautifully concluding this. A nation, of course, has to hold contradictions together, and that sort of reflects growth. And since we're on the subject of geopolitics as well, I want to bring in Dr. Rizvi again. The Wall Street Journal, recently christened Bangladesh as South Asia's economic bull case, a retort to, of course, the then US Secretary of State, as we discussed before, Henry Kissinger's disparagement of post-independence Bangladesh as a basket case. Just last year, the US, it seems, decided to end its traditional strategic neglect through a rare visit to Dhaka by the Deputy Secretary of State, Stephen Bune. How are things looking as far as US-Bangladesh relationship is concerned? And do you think that this sort of emerging proximity to the US would be conflicting to Bangladesh's relationship to China, which of course is again amicable, and also because the US sees China as its foremost competitor, especially with Biden's remarks as extreme competition?
Actually, let me just add a little correction. We have had a whole series of high-level visits from the United States, because United States is one of our closer allies. And in fact, with many of the US foreign policy priorities, democratic nations, liberal Islam, food security, health, Bangladesh and US have very, very close identification. United States is our largest single market of our export. We have excellent relationship. Of course, we also know that it was, everybody saw that on television when a president of the United States asked his aides, "Where is Bangladesh?" So there is a asymmetry there, and we live with it, but we have no. See, every country has its own national interests. And to the extent that our national interest demands we have close relationship with India, close economic connections with India, and it is our largest and the nearest neighbor, that is not going to be changed simply because you have to pander to somebody else. At the same time, we have economic relationships, trading, development relationship with China. There is no indication, and there's never ever been any suggestion that China is looking for access to our ports or to play any. No, we keep all these countries at a safe length from us when it comes to our deep sea port, our Chittagong port, open to all, but not to the military or military use or any such thing. We are signatory to the Road and Belt Initiative. We are interested in Indo-Pacific initiative. So it is in our national interest to go wherever our national interests are requires us to go. We don't have to. We are a although large population but a small state. We do not have to make choices between either or. We will go wherever it is in our best interest. And as you know, one of the great success of Bangladesh, if I may say this, has been how we have kept everybody friendly, but nobody overbearing or over-intrusive in our affairs.
Thank you, Dr. Rizvi. That's a fair assessment. I think we've had, it's time to move on to look at to the future. Where do we go from here? What are the challenges we're facing? And Asif, your recent book, Buddhist Nationalism, Rohingya Crisis and Contemporary Politics, is elaborated on the present Rohingya crisis. Tensions between Myanmar and Bangladesh seem to be fairly evident. I think one such instance could be a direct response. That was in June 2019, when a trusted aide to the Myanmar government told an audience in Japan that Bangladesh was responsible to the failure of repatriation, and Bangladesh's Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina responded by saying, the problem lies with Myanmar, as they don't want to take any Rohingyas take back the Rohingyas by any means. Could you reflect on Bangladesh's current dilemma in dealing with refugees and let us know, how do you feel about this response?
Thanks, Simple, for bringing up this question, because right now, one of the biggest crises that we are facing is in our border areas with the Rohingya community. And the thing is that I think Prime Minister was right while she was making the remark. It was not our problem. It was their problem. And we have been dragged into the problem because of our geographical proximity. Just imagine if there was not Bangladesh, if it was Bhutan, they would be having the same problem. So we had very little to do with the problem that we are having now. Now, how we are dealing with the problem? I think in the humanitarian ground, Bangladesh did excellent. Bangladesh opened up its border, allowed these people to come, with its minimum resources, the first of all. And you also need to understand that the local people who are living there, they're also facing the challenge of living with this huge number of people just coming overnight there. And on the other hand, I think Bangladesh position with having a bilateral solution was to some extent also presents what Bangladesh thinks, that Bangladesh don't want to make itself a security state. Okay, so the one of the success that Bangladesh so far maintained is that Bangladesh stopped itself from being a security state. And just to link it with the previous question, with the India-Bangladesh relationship, look, we had all possible situations to be a security state, to invest more in military and militarize the border with India and Myanmar. There were so many crises just to trigger that. But the Bangladesh leadership over the years carefully maintained that a solution based on diplomacy would be the best for the people and for the country. Now, and that is a very pragmatic solution. And given the situation, I think the Rohingya crisis right now going on is not about to solve in next 1 decade or maybe next 2 decades. look, I mean, the data, if you look at the big data of these behaviors and the current development in Myanmar, it's really difficult to see a foreseeable solution in coming future. Now, there was two part: whether Bangladesh government should take a diplomatic step, empower its diplomacy, build more relationship with India and China, negotiate with them, and create a pressure over the Myanmar government to take back their refugees and ensure that our human rights could be ensured, because we have a constitutional commitment to human rights inside our country as well as to all the nations who are suffering. At the same time, the other options could be Bangladesh could, militarize the area, could invest more in the military and bring, go for a war. And that's not a wise actions to take. And I want to go back to an example, and that's how I will conclude my talk, is that, in the after our independence, there was Arab-Israel war going on. And Bangabandhu sent tea to Egypt, the soldiers, so that we can have a good relationship with Egypt in the post-war time. And Sadat, what he does is that he thought, okay, Bangladesh is a new state, it needs military and all these powers. So he offered like tanks. Okay, so he sent the tanks. And what happened? Those tanks came, and the tank has been received by Dalim, the person who actually killed Bangabandhu. And the tank were also used to kill the founding father of this state by deploying it in front of his house. Now we see what happens when we think in terms of security, because Bangabandhu was not happy to receive all those tanks. He wanted recognition, he wanted diplomacy, but then he got back the military equipments. The same case, if we start continuing doing, work towards a security state based on fear and based on this very benign idea of nationalism, us versus them, and this other, then we would not go to any solution and we would not be able to maintain the peace. But right now, Rohingyas are suffering. Bangladesh has a state responsibility and its people to support the people who are subject to human rights abuse. But at the same time, keeping it in the mind that the diplomatic solution is the best for the betterment of the Rohingyas and for Bangladesh and for the region.
Thank you so much, Asif. If I could turn to Professor Habib on what you think are your concluding remarks. How does the future look in terms of the economy? What kind of, model? Of course, there is not one particular answer as to, every nation has to follow different models and balance it out. But in your book on globalization, East and West, you've argued for a sociological understanding of globalization. How do you understand the rise of, Bangladesh's economy through this distinct process of heterogenizing globalization, and what steps do we take from here?
Thank you for asking that question. Heterogeneity is one of our strengths. Bangladesh culture has always been portrayed by historians as syncretic. Even in religious values, we have shown a great deal of syncretism, and that's the basis for this new mode that we call 21st century globalization. That we do not equate globalization with westernization or invasion of neoliberal capitalism anymore. We turn to China, and I think Bangladesh has done an amazing job in playing that role diplomatically. And I was listening to a famous diplomat in Singapore a couple of years ago giving a talk on Bangladesh, and he emphasized that it has built a relationship, a comprehensive strategic partnership with China without antagonizing India. And it has maintained a very historically, founded relationship with India, friendship treaty and all that, and yet it has not antagonized China. And China and India are the emerging powers, in the 21st century. As we can see, the shift of globalization has taken place. North America, especially the United States, is going to be more and more isolated. So we are going to see a robust relationship between Europe and China, and Bangladesh is right there. And even US is now building relationship with India, Australia, Japan. And in that quadrant, they're thinking of Bangladesh as a kind of partner, unofficial member of the quadrant, quadrant plus one. And in all that, I think the success that Bangladesh has gained diplomatically has been enormous. So we really have to think in terms of a globalized Bangladesh, what I call global Bangladesh. And their education has to play a key role. So one area Bangladesh has done fantastically well is in digital Bangladesh. More work needs to be done in software, in program writing, but in other areas of science, that you don't have to withdraw just because you don't have, broad-based education and so on. Even a country with a smaller population can excel in certain fields in science. In genomic research, there are research areas where you don't need huge amount of investment. And I can tell you that 50 years from independence, now we have Bangladeshi professor at Yale. 50 years ago, we didn't have that. Even if a student could go to Yale, that would be an achievement. Now we have Bangladeshi economics professor at Yale. We have Bangladeshi physicist at Princeton, and his name is now being mentioned as a future Nobel laureate. Think about that. We have second generation Bangladeshi teaching at Harvard. I think these are amazing achievements which we are not publicizing. These are undercurrents, you see, and that undercurrent will help us achieve what we need to achieve. We need to move into this new frontier of what people call fourth industrial revolution and all that. But without being hyperbolic, we really need to emphasize on education because Bangladeshis, as Asif said, are romantic, but they're both. I know Bangladeshi economists, top class economists, but also an accomplished Tego singer. And it's only Bengalis can do that. And I find many of my friends from West Bengal do that, scientist and a singer at the same time. Physicists writing poems. We have that in Bangladesh. So we really need to leverage on that. We need to leverage on our brain power. We need to nurture. We need to set up high-level research institutions in Bangladesh. We have had few like BIDS, CPD, but we need more comprehensive research institutions that would enable us to compete with international research. Dhaka University is still a great institution, and we're building relationships outwardly with institutions elsewhere. And most of the universities are actually doing that in Bangladesh. This is a new frontier that we are recruiting vice chancellor from top university in Hong Kong, world-class university. We are recruiting from those universities. So we are on the right path. What we need is more guidance, more retrospection, and moving forward, we need to utilize this excitement, this euphoria. This should not be a temporary, enjoyment. We need to build on that let's do that we can move forward. We can do much better. We have huge potential, and we have to realize our potential in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Habib, for laying down this hopeful trajectory, especially, highlighting grassroots developments. Dr. Rizvi, you're working on a book that discusses the 50 years of trajectory of Bangladesh. If you could tell us briefly about that and present some concluding remarks on what is in store for the future, for Bangladesh. And then I think we've spoken for quite some time, so we would be ending this wonderful discussion on that note.
Thank you, Simba. Yes, I also have another thing to go to, so I'm glad that we will end this thing. Now, to talk about my academic work and my book would be exaggerating, because in my current position, I have really difficulty pursuing any serious writing or reflection, although my book is making some progress, but I would rather at the moment not publicize it any more than that. But looking ahead for Bangladesh, as I said earlier, and I want to say that we need to look forward. And there are certain important things we have to do. One is we have to diversify in all directions. We have also been through information technology. Garments is good. There's still a lot of room to expand and also to reach upper reaches of the market. But needs to diversification is absolutely a must. Second is to keep pushing our economy and developing a society. We need skill development. Currently, Bangladesh is investing very heavily in skill developing, but this is a long march. We have a young population. They are our greatest asset. And essentially, by developing our skills, making people more skilled, we will convert mouths to feed into hands to create. That must be our one of our top priority. And most important for any society is strengthening our democratic institutions. We are proud that we have a democratic government, but we also know there's a lot of work to be done there. We have to work towards inclusive politics. There is our elections have shown that winner takes all. Well, even if electoral returns are winner goes all to one side, we need to make sure that all the voices are heard. Yes, majority in democracy, majority rules, but minority must be respectfully heard and their voices taken into account. And finally, we have to do a development. Growth is, in my mind, it becomes totally irrelevant if we do not bring about equitable growth, inclusive growth. And for that, Agenda 2030 is our target. And to reach our goals in Agenda 2030, we have to have inclusive growth with no one left behind. So those are my hopes for the future, at least for the coming decade. So thank you, Simple. Thank you so much for giving us this opportunity for this conversation. And thank you, Asif and Habib.
Thank you
For allowing me to.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rizvi. On that note, I would love to thank
30 seconds,
all the panelists. Yes, please, Asif.
Yeah. So
Dr.
it's
Rizvi,
about a comment, actually. I think someone really got offended with my comment that we become fairer. I didn't mean it to be a, color bias perspective. My point was that because you're getting good nutrition, you would be healthy. That's all. That was my point. So I hope the person who made that comment, I didn't mean to offend him or her. That was my point. And the last thing is that thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. And the other thing is that I just want to take this opportunity to publicize our upcoming book. Actually, me and Professor Habib and one of our colleague, Dr. Olav, we three are editing a book. We got almost like 28 chapters from some of the best mind of this country, including Dr. Kamal Hussain, including Dr. Rehman Sobhan, Dr. Ali Riaz, and others. And the book is about to come this year from Palgrave Macmillan, London. And we hope that this would be, from our side, a contribution and gift to our people and student to study about our country and its achievement that has happened in the last 50 years. Thank you very much.
On that note, I would thank the three of you for taking out time from your busy schedule and engaging in this wonderful discussion. And of course, I wish all of you best, for the endeavors. It's been a pleasure to speak to all of you. I thank our viewers for staying here with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simple, for having us. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Professor.